Introduction to the DOM. The Document Object Model DOM is the data representation of the objects that comprise the structure and content of a document on the web. This guide will introduce the DOM, look at how the DOM represents an HTML document in memory, and how to use APIs to create web content and applications. So what is the DOM? The Document Object Model is a programming interface for web documents. It represents the page so that the programs can change the document's structure, style, and content. The DOM represents the document as nodes and objects. That way, programming languages can interact with the page. A web page is a document that can be either displayed in the browser window or as the HTML source. In both cases, it is the same document, but the document object model representation allows it to be manipulated. As an object-oriented representation of the web page, it can be modified with a scripting language such as JavaScript. For example, the DOM specifies that the query selector all method and this code snippet must return a list of all the paragraph elements in the document. So here we have a constant statement declaration named paragraph. So we are setting it to the document that query selector, and we are passing this string p. So here we have the paragraph. The index 0 is the first paragraph element, then we have the paragraph index 1 is the second p element. So in arrays, the first element is 0, the second element is 1, etc. So then we have an alert, and we have paragraphs array 0 that node name. All the properties, methods, and events available for manipulating and creating web pages are organized into objects. For example, the document object that represents the document itself, any table objects that implement the HTML table element, that interface for accessing HTML tables, and so forth, are all objects. So the DOM is built using multiple APIs that work together. The core DOM defines the entities describing any document and the objects within it. This is expanded upon as needed by other APIs that add new features and capabilities to the DOM. For example, the HTML DOM API adds support for representing HTML documents to the core DOM, and the SVG API adds support for representing SVG documents. So now here we have the DOM and JavaScript. The previous short example, like nearly all examples, is JavaScript. That is to say, it is written in JavaScript but uses the DOM to access the document and its elements. The DOM is not a programming language, but without it, the JavaScript language wouldn't have any model or notion of web pages, HTML documents, SVG documents, and their component parts. The document as a whole, the head tables within the document, table headers, text within the table cells, and all other elements in a document are parts of the document object model for the document. They can all be accessed and manipulated using the DOM in a scripting language like JavaScript. The DOM is not part of JavaScript language, but is instead a web API used to build websites. JavaScript can also be used in other contexts. For example, Node.js just runs JavaScript programs on a computer but provides a different set of APIs, and the DOM API is not a core part of the Node.js runtime. The DOM was designed to be independent of any particular programming language, making the structural representation of the document available from a single, consistent API. Even if most web developers will only use the DOM through JavaScript, implementations of the DOM can be built for any language, as this Python example demonstrates. So if you kind of like this programming language Python, so here we have an example. So here this is a comment, then we have the import xml.dom mini DOM as m, then we have the doc, and we are setting it to the end.parse, and we are passing arc double quote c, the dc, and then /prior /py /chapter1.xml. Then we have the doc.node name, and then we have some comments. DOM property of document object, And finally we have the p underscore list, and we are setting it to the DAG that get elements by tag name, and we are passing para. Okay, so for more information on what technologies are involved in writing JavaScript on the web, see JavaScript technologies overview, so you can check out the link. Now, accessing the DOM. You don't have to do anything special to begin using the DOM. You use the API directly in JavaScript from within what is called a script, a program written by a browser. When you create a script, whether inline in a script element or included in the web page, you can immediately begin using the API for the document or window objects to manipulate the document itself, or any of the various elements in the web page, the descending elements of the document. Your DOM programming may be something as simple as the following example, which displays a message on the console by using the console.log function. Yeah, pretty much here we have some HTML. So we have the body element, so we have the unload property, and we are setting it to the console.log, and we are passing this string, just pretty much welcome to my home page. So that's pretty much it. As it is generally not recommended to mix the structure of the page within written in HTML and manipulation of the DOM written in JavaScript, the JavaScript part will be grouped together here and separated from the HTML. For example, the following function creates a new h1 element, adds text to that element, and then adds it to the tree for the document. So let me see. Yeah, let me see. So we have this example. I can just, well, we can just grab it pretty much here, and let me see, let's go to, I don't know, to any folder, and just we can just name it DOM, like this, or capital like that, done. And then we're gonna right click, open in terminal, and then we're gonna just type in code space that, so we can open it in Visual Studio Code. And now we can just pretty much new file, and we can just index.html like that, and we can paste this. So now we can just right click and then open with live server. So obviously, well, okay, so we have just this words, but now we're gonna press Ctrl Shift I, and okay, so we have nothing here. Let me see, we have the, okay, so you can see the body, the HTML here, we can see the console source. Okay, let me see. Okay, for example, the following function creates a new h element, adds text to that element, and then adds it to the tree document. Okay, so yeah, okay, run this function when the document is loaded. So we have the Windows unload, so, and this is an error function. Okay, so we have this constant declaration heading, we are setting it to the document that create elements. So we have the h1, then we have another variable heading text document that create text node, and this is big head, so this is the text that we have here. Okay, then we are using this variable heading, and we're using the method appendix child. So we have heading that appendix child, and we are passing heading text, so we are passing the second variable here, and the second variable is the, well, is set to this string big head, so that is the reason that we have this here. Okay, and yeah, this is pretty much all that we have. Now, fundamental data types. This page tries to describe the various objects and types in simple terms, but there are a number of different data types VM pass around the API that you should be aware of. So note, because the vast majority of code that uses the DOM revolves around manipulating HTML documents, it's common to refer to the node and the DOM as elements, although strictly speaking, not every node is an element. Okay, so here we have the following table briefly describes these data types. So we have this table with two columns. So this column has the data type, the interface, and the second is the description. Okay, so we have the document. When a member returns an object type document, e.g. the owner document property of an element returns the document to which it belongs. This object is the root document object itself. The DOM document reference chapter describes the document object. We have the node. Every object located within a document is a node of some kind. In an HTML document, an object can be an element node, but also a text node or attribute node. We have an element, okay? The element type is based on node. It refers to an element or node of type element returned by a member of the DOM API, rather than saying, for example, that the document that create element method returns an object reference to a node. We just say that this method returns the element that just has been created in the DOM. That element object implemented the DOM element interface and also the more basic node interface, both of which are included together in this reference. In an HTML document, elements are further enhanced by the HTML DOM API's HTML element interface, as well as other interfaces describing capabilities of specific kinds of elements. For instance, HTML table element for table elements. Then we have the node list. A node list is an array of elements like the kind that is returned by the method document that query selector all. Items in a node list are accessed by indexing either two ways: list that item and we passing one, or just list and then open brackets and passing one. These two are equivalent. And the first item, so item parentheses, is the single method on the node list object. The latter uses the typical array syntax, so that's the reason we're using brackets instead of parentheses. The typical array syntax to fetch the second item in the list. Then we have the attribute when, or just attr, when an attribute is returned by a member, e.g. by the create attribute method. It is an object reference that exposes a special, albeit small, interface for attributes. Attributes are nodes in the DOM, just like elements are, though you may rarely use them as such. Then we have the named node map. A named node map is like an array, but the items are accessed by the name or index, though this latter case is merely a convenience for enumeration, as they are in no particular order in the list. A named node map has an item method for this purpose, and you can also add and remove items from a named node map. So there are also some common terminology considerations to keep in mind. It's common to refer to any attribute node as an attribute, for example, and to refer to an array of DOM nodes as a node list. You will find these terms in order to be introduced and used throughout this documentation. Now we have the DOM interfaces. This guide is about the objects and the actual things you can use to manipulate the DOM hierarchy. There are many points where understanding how these works can be confusing. For example, the object representing the HTML form element gets its name property from the HTML form element interface, but its class name property from the HTML element interface. In both cases, the property you want is in that form object, but the relationship between objects and the interfaces that they implement in the DOM can be confusing, and so the section attempts to say a little something about the actual interfaces and the DOM specification and how they are made available. So we have the interfaces and objects. Many objects implement several different interfaces. The table object, for example, implements a specialized HTML table element interface, which includes such methods as create caption and insert row. But since it's also an HTML element, table implements the element interface described in the DOM element reference chapter. And finally, since an HTML element is also, as far as the DOM is concerned, a node in the tree of nodes that make up the object model for the HTML or XML page, the table object also implements the more basic node interface from which element derives. When you get a reference to a table object, as in the following example, you routinely use all the three of these interfaces interchangeably on the object, perhaps without knowing it. So here they're giving us another example. So Pretty much we have this constant declaration named table, and we are setting it to the document that get element by ID, and we're passing the string table. Then we have a second variable, the constant declaration named table attributes, and we are setting it to the table that attributes. So now the slash element interface, now we have a for loop, and we have this variable declaration, we have this let declaration name I, and we are initializing it to 0. So we have this condition: as long as the variable I is less than the table attribute that length, we are going to increment the variable I by 1. So we have the HTML table element interface border attribute. So we have an if statement inside of the for loop. If the table attributes, and we are passing the array I, okay, and we are chaining it to the node name, and we are using the method to lowercase. So we have the table attribute passing I inside of the brackets, that node name, that lowercase. If this whole thing is equal to the string border, then we are gonna set the table that borders to 1, to the string 1, not to the number 1, but to the string 1. Okay, so we have this if, we have this for, and now we're gonna have the table element interface summary attribute. So outside of the for loop, we are gonna have the table that summary, we are setting it to this string node increase border. So now we're gonna see the core interfaces in the DOM. This section lists some of the most commonly used interfaces in the DOM. The idea is not to describe what these APIs do here, but to give you an idea of what the source of methods and properties you will see very often as you use the DOM. These common APIs are used in the longer examples and the DOM examples chapter at the end of this book. So the document and window objects are the objects whose interfaces you generally use most often in the DOM programming. In simple terms, the window object represents something like the browser, and the document object is the root of the document itself. Element inherits from the generic node interface, and together these two interfaces provide many of the methods and properties you use on individual elements. These elements may also have specific interfaces for dealing with the kind of data those elements hold, as in the table object example in the previous section. The following is a brief list of common APIs in web and XML page scripting using the DOM, and here we have just the document.query selector that we already saw in previous videos. We have the document.query selector all, and again you can check out here, you can click and have more information. This is more and more detail. We have the document.create element, we have the element.inner HTML, we have the element.set attribute, element.get attribute, event target, that add event listener, we have the HTML element that is style, and we have the node that append child, node that append child, we have the window that unload, and finally the window that scroll to. So here we have some examples. So setting text context, this example uses a div element containing a text area into buttons element. When the user clicks the first button, we set some text, and the text area, when the user clicks the second button, we clear the text. So we use document.query selector to access the text area and the button. Then we have the event target that add event listener to listen for the button clicks, and finally we have the node that text content to set and clear the text. So we have this let me see, oops, no, we have this HTML. So again, okay, so yeah, this is a small code. So we have a div, and this div, okay, so this div element has a class property of container. Okay, inside of this div we're gonna have a text area element with a class property of story. We're also gonna have a button element with a ID property of set text, a type property of button. We're gonna have some information, set text content. We're gonna have a second button with an ID property. This time is gonna be clear text with a type property of button as well, and we are gonna have it to some text named clear text content. Okay, so some basic CSS. So it's gonna be that container. So we open curly braces, we have the display, we're setting it to flex, we have the gap, we're setting it to 0.5 in rem, and we have the flex dash direction, and we're setting it to column. So this is for the container now. Let me see, for the container now we are setting it for the button, and the button just we're gonna have a width of 200 pixels. So the JavaScript pretty much is gonna be okay. So we're gonna have this constant declaration name story, and we are gonna set it to the document that body that query selector, and we are gonna pass in that story. We're gonna have the constant declaration name set text, and we're gonna set it to the document that body that query selector, and we're gonna pass in number sign set dash text, and we're gonna use this variable set text, and we're gonna use this method add event listener, and we're gonna listen for the click, and we're gonna have an error function, and inside of the curly braces we're gonna have the story. So this variable that text context, okay, and we're gonna set it to it was dark and stormy night, so we're gonna set it to this string. Now we're gonna have this constant declaration clear text, and we're gonna set it to the document that body that query selector, and we are gonna have in the we're gonna have this string number sign clear dash text. We are gonna have this variable clear text, and we are gonna use this method add event listener. We're gonna listen for the click, we're gonna have the error function, we're gonna have inside of the curly braces the story that text content, and we're gonna set it to an empty string, so just double quotes, and this is the result pretty much. So we have set context, it was dark and stormy, okay, and okay, so if I click here, oops, clear text, let me see, I can type something, I don't know, type something, and let me see, clear context, okay. If I clear here, well, I can just delete it here. Let me see, we can also click here and play, and yeah, I mean you can just run it, oops, yeah, you can run it from here. Let me see, set text context, so it was dark and stormy, now clear context, clear text context, okay, set context, I set it. If I click here, it's gonna disappear, okay, so that's that. Now adding a child element, this example uses a div element containing a div and two button elements. When the user clicks the first button, we create a new element and add it as a child of the div. When the user clicks the second button, we remove the child element. We use the document that query selector to access the div and the buttons. We use the event target at event listener to listen for button clicks, document that create element to create an element, node that appendix child to append the child, and node that remove child to remove the child. So HTML, so we have this basic div element with a class property of container. Inside of that we're gonna have another div element with a class property of parent, so the text is gonna be parent. Then we're gonna have two buttons with ID add child and remove child, types is gonna be button, and then the text is gonna be add a child and remove a child, and this is the div. So I'm just gonna copy it, and I'm gonna go to my folder named DAM. So I just have a basic index.html file, and I'm gonna go inside of the body, and I'm gonna paste it here. So I'm gonna have this div inside of the body. I have a script, and I have a source pointed to my main.js object that is empty. I also have an style.css, so in my index.html file in line 7 I have a link with a rel set to the style sheet, and the href is set to the style.css. So I have that so far, and now what I'm gonna do is pretty much we're gonna have the CSS, so I'm gonna copy it, I'm gonna paste it right here in my CSS. And again, we just have the DAG container, we have the display set to flex, the gap set to the 0.5 ref, we have the flex direction set to column, we have the button set to the width 100 pixels, the div that parent is going to be set to the border 1 pixel solid black, padding 5 pixel, width 100 pixel, height 100 pixel, div that child, we're going to have the border, the margin, the padding, the width, the height, and back size in border box. And yeah, the border 1 pixel solid red, margin 10 pixels, padding 5 pixel, width 80 pixels, height 60 pixel, box sizing set to the border box. So we have that so far. Okay, so we can pretty much all plus O or just open with live server, and we have this so far. Okay, so if I click here, nothing's happening, obviously, because our main.js, so our JavaScript file is empty. So now finally we're gonna go into our JavaScript file. I'm just gonna copy and paste this whole thing, but we're gonna go over it. So we're gonna have this constant declaration name parent, and we're gonna set it to the document.body.query selector, and we're passing in the that parent. So we also have a second variable add child. We're setting it to the document.body.query selector, and we're passing the number sign that add dash child. Then we're gonna have the same variable, and we're gonna use the method add event listener. We're gonna listen for the click, and we're gonna have an error function. Only add a child if we don't already have one, in addition to the text node parent. So we have the if statement. If the parent that child knows that length is greater than 1, then we're gonna return. Then we're gonna have another constant declaration named child. We're gonna set it to the document that create element, and we're gonna pass in the div. Then we're gonna have the child that class list that add. We're gonna add the child. Then we're gonna have the child that text content, and we're gonna set it to the string child. Finally, we're gonna have the parent that append child, and we're gonna pass in child in the parentheses. Then we're gonna have the const declaration name remove child. We're gonna set it to the document.body.query selector. Inside double quotes, we're gonna have the number sign remove child. We're gonna have this variable remove child that at event listener. We're gonna listen for the click. We're gonna have an error function, and we're gonna have this constant declaration name child. We're gonna set it to the document.body.query selector. We're gonna pass in inside the double quotes that child. And finally, we're gonna have the parent that remove child, and we're gonna pass in child in the parentheses. So this is the specification. This is pretty much you can check it out right here. So add child, remove child, so you can play it from right here, or we can go into our HTML, JavaScript file, our folder, and we can go into HTML and just pretty much right click and then open with live server. So this is what we have now, add child. So we are adding it, and now remove child, add child, remove child. So this is the code. So this is pretty much all that we have for the introduction to the DOM.